Well, what a surprise. And while I normally like surprises, this is not one of those times. Now let me start off by saying that I am a huge Excision fan. I don't think that there is a show in Denver in the last 5 years that I have missed him being at, whether that's either on his own tour or at some sort of festival. And I think that he is still one of the best DJs and influencers of EDM music of all time. So this constructive criticism is coming from a genuinely good place. And because I like Excision so much, it was definitely surprising that this album was so dang boring. That's right, boring. I literally found myself going over to my iPad to check halfway through the album to see if it had restarted because I thought I was listening to the same frickin' songs. And I honestly think that this album is an excellent example of something that we can use to demonstrate some of the struggles and the problems that are inherent in a lot of popular EDM culture and music production, right? It's just unfortunate that we have to be using an Excision album to talk about these problems. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. I have notes here. The first thing I want to talk about is the fact that just because it's a trend in music doesn't mean it actually sounds good. And I know some of you are probably saying, but Austin, if it doesn't sound good, why is it a trend? Why do so many people listen to it? A trend in music usually happens when an A-lister DJ tries something experimental like one time, and then everybody on the planet is like, oh my god, that was so great, I'm gonna play it because so-and-so played it, right? A really good example of this can be seen back in like 2012, 2013, when Skrillex started using that really high-pitched pulse, like almost like a siren, over top of his bass line, and then everyone decided that they were gonna do it because Skrillex did it. But the problem is that it wasn't necessarily something that was sonically pleasant to the ear, and so when you used it a lot, actually a lot of people started getting complaints that it was doing damage to the audience members' ears. And I've seen a few artists try to bring it back even in the last year or so, and they've gotten either booed off the stage or half the audience is left because it just doesn't work, right? It was something that people were trying, but it never really caught on, especially in the mainstream. And quite honestly, if I hear it nowadays, I kind of add that DJ to my do not listen to list because clearly they don't understand where music has come in the last 5 years. The trend here revolves around that really solid, heavy 1-2 bass line that's present throughout this entire album. And that bass line became super popular in mid-2015 through 2016. It was kind of brought over by a lot of people that were coming from trap into trap step. And I think it was adapted quite nicely by some of the other EDM artists that were already in the dubstep scene, like Kill the Noise, Snails, Zomboy. I think they all successfully adapted that type of sound into their music pretty early on. But now fast forward to 2018 and that trend is kind of phasing out. And so the fact that this album relies so heavily on that bass line when we've heard it for 2 years straight at this point, it's kind of odd to me that Excision would go in the direction of something that is on its way out as far as the music trends go. Well, it is a struggle for many DJs and artists, especially considering the EDM music scene is so readily accessible by pretty much anybody, right? Like everybody has either laptops or computers or access to software to create this type of sounding music that it is a struggle, and I understand the struggle coming from an artist standpoint of how do I make something sound not generic. And it's just really sad to see that apparent here. Because literally, throughout this entire album, like 11 songs out of the 14 on this album, it's a hefty amount, rely almost completely on a heavy-hitting 1-2 bass drop. And it really doesn't vary. There are obviously slight like tonal changes throughout the melody of the bass line, which is okay. But for the most part, it's literally the same thing. If you put it up on a sonic spectrograph and you like look at the up-down beats, they're almost identical with every single song. Like there really isn't that much of a difference. There wasn't enough variation to keep me interested. In fact, when I went through the second time, I found myself really wanting to skip songs and just get to my favorites, the ones that I was just like, hey, that's actually really, really good. I think if this were pretty much any other artist, a lot more people would be really considering whether or not they just kind of phoned it in for this album as opposed to like making a genuine step forward. And when one of your songs goes into the vault, so to speak, and is heavily comprised of just song snippets from other previous hits, you do kind of wonder, maybe that's what's going on right now. But I do want to end on a positive note, because I think that there are some gems here that are genuinely great pieces of music. Alright, so the first song I want to talk about is called Wake Up. It's the third track on the album, and it's really, really an excellent piece of work. I think both Excision and Sullivan King, who does the vocals and obviously probably contributed to other elements of the music with the guitar and everything like that, they should be really proud of this. It's really excellent. It starts off with more of a heavy vocal emphasis, right? And then it transitions to the first bass line, which is a more slow pace but heavy bass line. It's really, really beautiful. And then about halfway through the song, it starts to transition with the timing, as well as Sullivan King's more vocals becoming a little bit more aggressive. And then it phases into the last refrain, which is a really nicely constructed heavy 1-2 bass line. Because I do think that bass line can be very successful. I think this is probably just the best utilization of that bass line on this album. So the second song I want to talk about is Where Are You? And it's about halfway through the album, and it's a welcome breath of fresh air, of just something different to listen to. And it kind of goes back to the Excision's old original roots of having that kind of eerie, off-sounding vibe to it, with an interesting, different bass line. I really appreciated it. It reminded me of why I started to like this type of music in the first place. So I thought that was really good. The third song that I think deserves a mention is Fight Through the Pain. It's the second to last song on the album, and I think it's another really good demonstration of how, when utilized properly, the 1-2 bass line hit can be really a lot of fun and have a lot of energy and enthusiasm behind it. And I also really love the guitar work on this. I think it just adds a different level to the spectrum that is this album, and I think it's definitely much needed. So those are my thoughts on Excision's new album called Apex. What did you think? Did you like it? Did you not? Be sure to tell me why down below. I know a lot of people did enjoy this music, particularly if they were stoned or really drunk, as most of my friends were when they listened to it. So thanks for going over this with me, and I look forward to seeing you next time.